Hey everyone, I'm here to tell you more about the semi-automatic tube labeling machine. I'm going to show you how to put this machine together, I'm going to show you how to operate this machine, and I'm going to show you how to make a couple modifications to this machine to make it work better with pre-rolled tubes specifically. Hey everyone, first things first, I'm going to show you all the pieces that come with your semi-automatic tube labeling machine, and then I'm going to show you how to put it together. So first, starting on this right hand side, we have these two plastic guides. These are going to help you position your label into the right orientation so that when you label your container, the labels get put onto the right part of the container. On one of these guides, you'll see an additional wire piece here. This wire piece will help you know exactly when to stop turning this handle so that you've only labeled one label onto each container and you don't accidentally put a second label on or anything like that. You have these two additional arms. These arms will basically secure the guides that I just showed you in place. One of the arms will come with an additional wheel. This wheel is essentially to put some extra pressure on the container, make sure you get an even label on the container, make sure that it's nicely adhered to the container. It'll come with one of these rods. This rod is basically for holding the labels in place. It'll come with these two rod holders so that the rod can actually be installed onto the label roll. It'll come with this label clip. This clip will basically hold down the excess paper that's coming off the labels and rewind it. And then it'll come with some extra washers and these foam attachments. You'll need these washers and foam attachments basically for hinged lid containers. You need to make some slight modifications to this machine in order for it to work with anything that has a hinged lid. So that would be pre-rolled tubes, for instance. You also just need two pieces of painter's tape. You'll need two screwdrivers with Phillips head, one very small one, maybe something you would use on computers, and just one regular one. And then we have labels here, of course. These are BOPP, and we would recommend BOPP or vinyl to be used, as these adhere best to the pre-rolled tubes, especially when you're working in a dusty environment or you know how cannabis is oily. So that can cause a lot of adherence challenges, so definitely recommend using BOPP or vinyl. And then lastly, we have our pre-rolled tubes here. We actually have two different pre-rolled tubes. These ones are made in the US. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're just gonna be higher quality, more consistent in terms of always being straight. And you'll see, of course, that it has a hinged lid like most pre-rolled tubes do. These ones are slightly cheaper tubes made overseas. They're pretty good, but they're not going to be straight every single time. So I took out some of the worst offenders from a batch in terms of how curved they were, and we're going to try them out on the machine, see how they perform. So next up, we're basically just going to show you how to put everything together, and then we're going to get into labeling some tubes. Alright, so first step in putting this whole thing together is, since we're doing pre-rolled tubes, we're going to want to make our modifications first. Making the modifications first is going to be much easier in terms of just access everything and working over this machine. So we take the small Phillips head screwdriver and we just unscrew the blade here. So once you've removed the blade, then you can add the foam inserts. So the foam inserts you're essentially going to want sort of in the center of where your labels are going to be. So if I take my roll of labels and I think I'm going to have it positioned probably right around there, then I know that my foam insert should be just about there. So once I know that, I take one of these pieces of painter's tape and I just tape it onto the inside. And so that I could put this piece of foam right here, right around this piece. And I'm just gonna wanna really pull it taut when I do it. All right, so now that you have both foam inserts on, and it is okay if there's a little bit of space, you couldn't quite make the foam inserts reach each other. We do wanna minimize the amount of space as much as possible, however. The next step is going to be reinstalling this blade. So we reinstall the blade with this blade side facing away from me, so facing towards the rollers. And you'll see that because this foam insert is here now, we can't reinstall the blade quite as easily or at all, really. And so what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna install 5 washers on each side. So we'll put the washers over the holes, and we'll just reinstall this blade right here. Alright, so now that you've installed your pre-roll modifications to the tube labeling machine, we can move on to installing the labels onto the actual machine so we can get started labeling. So, we'll take our labels and we'll install our rod holders. This label is a 3-inch diameter, so everything on here is going to come to work with 3-inch diameter labels. So we install the rod holders just like so. And then we put our rod right through it and we center our labels. And we're going to want to make sure that when we put this rod in and the labels in, that the labels are going to unwind with the label facing down. So just make sure as you do this, keep that in mind. You want the labels facing down when you install it. So we take our guides, and we have 2 guides. This wire right here, we want that to be on the inside. So this is going to go on the right-hand side. And then this one's going to go on the other side. And we're just going to leave it sitting like this. And we're going to take our arms. Again, there's 2 arms, and there's also screws on the top. The screws should be facing upwards. And we want the wheel on the inside in between the guides. So this is going to go on the right, and this is going to go on the left with the screws facing up. This one's a little bit tight, so I'm just going to unscrew it, loosen it a little bit. And I bring this all together, and I center it, and then I just lift it up so the notches are all aligned, so that when I go to install this, I can just get all the notches in there. And then I drop down the rod, put that in there, straighten everything out, and then I'm going to tighten these guides, these arms, so that the guides can't move around. Alright, so now that we've got our labels installed, they're in the right position, we have everything ready to go. So we're going to take our labels here, and we're going to drag it through underneath this, and then we're going to try to feed the labels through underneath the blade. Now I'm behind the machine, which is quite a difficult way to install them, but you're going to want to be on the other side of the machine definitely. I'm just doing it this way to show you guys that you can see everything. So I'm just going to thread it through here, and then I'm going to bring the labels back onto this rod. I'm going to take that label clip we had got, and I click it right on. Make sure everything's good there. And so now when I pull this handle, it's just gonna wind up the labels, wind them up, and it's gonna bring the next label out. And you can see right there, the label is ready to get adhered to something. All right, so now that I've installed the labels and I lay down my tube right here, I can see right now where it's positioned. The label is going to be mostly on the top end of the tube. I don't really want that. I want it centered in the middle of the tube with about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch space off the top and end. So we have this guide here which will help us do that. But the way it's installed right now, it doesn't really give us enough space to do these long 109 mm pre-rolled tubes. So basically I'm just going to take this piece off, and I'm gonna take this nut off and leave this one on. So I'm only taking off this middle nut right here, and I'm leaving the rest on. I'm gonna wanna sort of adjust the height here. So I put down the tube, and I see what height does it need to be at. And then if I see right there, it's actually slightly in the wrong position. This piece isn't really in the middle of the tube, so we're actually gonna wanna adjust that first. So I bring this back up, tighten it, and then I'm going to loosen a screw down here, which will allow me to move this a little bit more to the center here, and then just tighten it right back up. Now that I have it more centered, I can bring this down, and now it's in a good position. Tighten it at the height I want, and we're almost ready to go. So as you can see, there's a little bit too much space between these 2 rods for the diameter of this tube, since this is quite a narrow tube, like all pre-rolled tubes are. We're gonna wanna sort of just bring this rod forward. So the way we do that is we're gonna loosen these wing nuts on the side, on both sides, which will then allow us to slide this a little bit closer together. And we're gonna want a little gap, but not too much. And we're gonna wanna make sure that the tube can still roll around. This looks about good. And then I'm just gonna tighten these wing nuts again so that the rod can't move. All right, so right here is your wire guide, and you can adjust this wire by moving it back and forth. And so right now this is perfectly adjusted for our labels. But what this will do essentially is as you turn this handle, you'll see that the wire guide is following the label. So we know as soon as this wire guide hits the space in between the two labels, one whole label has come out of the machine on the other end. So right here is we know we stop the handle and we take the container off because we've done one whole label at that point. So what you're gonna wanna do with these labels is you're gonna wanna make sure you have about a 1/2 inch to a 3/4 inch of the label out before you lay the tube down. You're gonna put the tube against your marker here and you're gonna press it right into there. And then you're just gonna unwind the rest of the label and then you have it on, just like that. Now, the machine, to get really, full efficiency, full speed out of this thing, you do have to get used to it a little bit, get your groove in. But once you have it in, it is very easy to label. And I'm doing these backwards, so of course that's a little bit harder. But yeah, just make sure you have a little bit of the label out, press your tube down, put some pressure on it, roll it, and then it's on. So I've just lined up the tubes that I just labeled, and you can see if you look at the top right here, you can see that the accuracy is very close. It's getting put into the same position each time. This is just gonna make your product look more professional. There's gonna be less chance of any type of error. There's less chance of adherence issues because you're getting the same kind of pressure and into the same position each time. And then, of course, your fingers are just not gonna get tired. So you could be labeling all day. You could be labeling all day the next day. You could be labeling all day the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and you'll be fine. You'll be able to do about 250 to 500 an hour with this machine. So it is definitely a lower volume machine for smaller runs, but it carries a very cheap price point. So now that I've shown you all the parts that come with the machine, how to put the machine together, and how to operate the machine, let me just talk about some of the general benefits of using a semi-automatic tube labeling machine like this. First and foremost, it's going to be consistency. As you can see from the tubes that we just labeled, the 6 or 7 that we did, each one has a very, very consistent distance from the top of the tube to the label. So you're gonna get the label in the same position almost every single time. Next is operator stress. Now this machine is going to totally eliminate any operator stress. If you're labeling tubes by hand, you know how much effort on your fingers and how much stress it produces on the operator, on their fingers in order to label tubes by hand. Using a machine like this, you could label tubes for 8 hours a day with minimal stress. The only actions you're really doing is placing the tube down and turning the handle. So very, very little stress on the operator. Now this setup that I've shown you is the general setup for any type of containers, but as you noticed, we didn't really use this wheel at all. We found that the wheel doesn't work that well with very small, narrow containers like the pre-rolled tubes. And we tinkered around with the machine a little bit, and we think we've come up with a slightly better setup for pre-rolled tubes specifically. So I'm gonna jump into that. I'm gonna show you how to modify this machine a little bit with some very basic supplies in order to make it work a little bit better for pre-rolled tubes. So, in order to do this modification, you're going to want to take the machine completely apart. And so we've removed the blade, we removed all the arms, we removed the guide, we removed the labels. And what you're going to need is you're going to need to buy some O-rings. And we purchased these from Lowe's or Home Depot, just for $2.50. These are 15 over 16th inch inner diameter O-rings that are 1/8 inch thick. So we have 10 O-rings in here. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to put the O-rings over this tube. We're going to put it over this tube. And we're going to use the O-rings to secure the labels in place, since we really didn't need these arms or the wheel. We can just use these O-rings. It's going to make putting new labels on much easier and much faster. So let's just get right into some of these modifications right here. The first step is we're going to want to get our O-rings on these rods right here. And so in order to do that, we have to basically take the entire machine apart. So before we do that, I just want to forewarn everyone and say that by taking the machine apart, you can damage it and you can ruin your machine if you put too much pressure on a specific part. If you make a mistake or if you lose something, the machine, you're not going to be able to put it back together, or it's going to be difficult. So do this at your own risk. So the first step is going to be essentially to remove everything that's holding these two walls together. So that's going to be these bolts on the bottom right here, as well as this turning handle, which has essentially just an Allen key right there, an Allen wrench that you're going to need to use in order to open that up. Alright, so as you can see, we've taken the machine totally apart. We didn't really show taking it apart in too much detail. The reason being is if you aren't really familiar enough with like screws and all these different little pieces to take the machine apart, we generally recommend that you shouldn't take the machine apart, because if you take this apart and you come to us and you say, hey, I can't put it back together, we really can't help you. This is like a personal mod. This is just something that we played around with and figured out, and we can't really guarantee, you know, perfect performance or anything. So this is just totally if it's something that you want to try out, it's your prerogative and you can try it out and you could see basically generally how it's done. All right, so first things first. We took this whole thing apart so basically that we could access these two rods. And so what we want to do is we want to put O-rings onto these rods. So simple enough, I'm going to put 5 onto this rod and then 3 onto the other one. You could experiment with different amounts of O-rings on each one to see what works best with your process or your container. But today we're gonna try 5 and 3. We think that's probably gonna do a pretty good job. After I get all these O-rings onto each piece, we'll put this whole thing back together and we'll show you some of the improvements and why it's a little bit better. All right, so now we've put the machine back together and we added a couple of our modifications, and I'm just gonna go over some of those ones that we've added. So earlier in the video I said we were gonna add 3 and 5 O-rings. We found that we think it's a little bit better with 5 and 5, and in fact it may actually be better on this back rod to have it all covered with O-rings as to where the label is, and I'll show you why in a second. And then another thing we did is we removed these arms since we're not really using this wheel. And we also removed the guides, and because our tubes are clear, it's easier just to look through the tube rather than use this wire guide. But if your tube was black or opaque, then I'll show you how you could just add this on. So what we've done with the labels here is instead of using the arms to secure the labels in place, what we've done is we've actually used 2 O-rings. And so that's just gonna make it a lot easier when you wanna exchange out your labels with a new roll. You just slide the O-ring off and then you put a new roll of labels on and you slide the O-rings back on. And so that's worked pretty good for us here. And so next I'm just gonna show you a couple tubes run through this machine with its modifications and show you how it works. So now you just saw me run a couple different types of tubes through this machine. On the left-hand side, we have the straighter, slightly more expensive US-made pre-rolled tubes. And on the right side, we have the slightly cheaper and they're the less straight tubes from overseas. As you can see, the tubes that are made in the US that are straighter and a little bit higher quality, you're going to get much better adherence of the labels, and you're going to avoid a lot of crinkling and stuff like that when you apply the labels. Whereas on the right hand side with the cheaper tubes, if they're not perfectly straight, you can get crinkling on the labels. Now I did choose the worst offenders out of a pack of 1,000 of these tubes. And so these are really, you're not going to get this every single time, but you will get it if on the tubes that aren't straight. So it is very important to use good quality tubes before you start labeling, and also to use high quality labels that will adhere to the pre-rolled tubes. And so ultimately, this machine, it helps reduce operator stress, it helps you label pre-rolled tubes consistently, and it helps you label at a faster rate. If you have any other questions, contact us at www.customconesusa.com. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching our new video. Check out the other videos on this page. Comment below with any questions and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on all our new products. We at Custom Cones USA are your pre-roll experts.